The Accidental Correspondence. Chapter 1. The Letter That Shouldn't Have Been. I should have known better than to trust my own handwriting at 73 years old. But there I was, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of Earl Grey growing cold beside me, squinting at an address I'd copied from my ancient address book. A book so old it still listed people by their parents' telephone exchanges. The letter itself had been brewing in my mind for weeks, ever since I'd stumbled across a box of old photographs in the attic. There she was. Margaret Thornbury, frozen in time at 19, laughing on a beach in Brighton, her hair wild in the wind. We'd been mad about each other that summer of 1969, right before she moved to Edinburgh for university, and I stayed behind to run my father's hardware shop. Life had seemed so long then, so full of possibility. We'd promised to write. We hadn't. 54 years is a long time to carry a torch, but apparently, I'm committed to my hobbies. So I wrote the letter. Not because I expected anything to come of it. Margaret was probably a great-grandmother by now, if she was still around at all. But because my daughter Emma had recently told me I needed to process my feelings, instead of bottling everything up like a proper English gentleman. She'd been reading self-help books again. The letter was ridiculous, of course. 3 pages of reminiscences about fish and chips on the pier, dancing to the Beatles at the church hall, and that one perfect kiss under the West Pier. Before it burned down, naturally. Even our romantic landmarks couldn't last. I signed it, "Your devoted fool, Henry Pickering," sealed it with entirely too much tape because my hands shake now, and walked it to the postbox before I could change my mind. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was not wearing my reading glasses when I copied the address. Chapter 2. An Unexpected Reply. 2 weeks later, I'd forgotten all about the letter. Well, not forgotten exactly. More like shoved it into the mental drawer labeled embarrassing things we don't discuss, right next to that time I called my teacher Mum in front of the entire class in 1957. So when I found an envelope addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize, I assumed it was from the council about my bins again. They're very particular about bins these days. Instead, I found this. Dear Henry, I don't know who you are, and I'm fairly certain you don't know who I am either, but I received your letter last Tuesday, and I have to tell you. It's the loveliest thing anyone sent me in years. I'm not Margaret. My name is Dorothy Walsh, and I live at 14 Maple Street in Hartwell-on-Sea, which I suspect is not where you meant to send your letter at all. But after reading about your summer in Brighton and your Margaret, I couldn't bring myself to simply return it to sender. It felt too much like throwing away someone's heart. Here's the thing. I lost my husband, George, 3 years ago. We had 47 wonderful years together, and I miss him terribly. But your letter reminded me of something I'd almost forgotten. That feeling of being young and ridiculous and entirely consumed by someone else. George and I had our own Brighton, so to speak. Ours was in Cornwall, and there were no Beatles, just a very scratchy recording of Ella Fitzgerald that George played on his sister's record player. I have no right to respond to a letter that wasn't meant for me. But I wanted you to know that your words mattered, even to the wrong person. Maybe especially to the wrong person. If you'd like to write back, I promise I won't tell anyone about the crying you mentioned. Though I do think it's rather sweet that all you need is love still makes you emotional. Wishing you well, Dorothy Walsh. P.S. The West Pier burning down is definitely a metaphor for something, but I can't decide what. I read the letter 3 times, then once more while my toast burned in the toaster. Then I did something completely absurd. I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a proper belly laugh, the kind I hadn't managed since George Carlin died. Here I was, pouring my heart out to a woman who probably didn't remember me at all, and instead, it had landed in the lap of someone named Dorothy Walsh in a town I'd never heard of. Emma would say the universe was trying to tell me something. Emma believes in things like signs and manifestations. She once tried to explain Mercury being in retrograde to me for 20 minutes, while I nodded and thought about cricket. But standing in my kitchen, holding this letter from a complete stranger, who seemed to understand exactly why I'd written to Margaret in the first place. Well, that did feel a bit like the universe having a laugh at my expense. I sat down and wrote back immediately. Chapter 3. The correspondence begins. Dear Dorothy. Well, this is embarrassing. You're absolutely right. I meant to send that letter to 14 Maple Street in Hartwell-upon-Thames, not Hartwell-on-Sea. I'd apologize for my terrible handwriting, but at this point, I think we both know my penmanship is beyond redemption. Thank you for not simply thinking I was a mad stalker and calling the police. Thank you even more for writing back. Your letter was a bright spot in what has been, I'll admit, a rather grey week. Though all weeks are rather grey when you're 73, and your primary social interaction is with the fellow at the co-op who always asks if I need help reaching the top shelf. I'm not that short. I'm sorry about your George. 47 years is a remarkable innings, as they say. I got 8 years with my Patricia before cancer took her, and I thought that was hard enough. I can't imagine 47. Since you asked. And since you're apparently the only person who will ever read this letter, given that I've now established I can't address an envelope properly, I'll tell you the truth. I never married Margaret. Never saw her again after that summer, actually. Life got in the way, as it does. But Patricia was wonderful. Sharp as a tack, with a laugh that could clear a room or fill it, depending on her mood. She left me with Emma, who's now 46, and keeps trying to set me up on something called silver singles. I've told her I'd rather eat my own shoes. But yes, I do still cry at All You Need Is Love. In my defense, I also cry at John Lewis Christmas adverts and that bit in Casablanca when Ilsa gets on the plane. I'm not made of stone, Dorothy. The West Pier burning down is definitely a metaphor for how nothing gold can stay. But I prefer to think of it as proof that even our most beloved landmarks are temporary, so we might as well enjoy the fish and chips while we can. Yours in misaddressed correspondence, Henry. P.S. What's Hartwell-on-Sea like? I'm picturing something impossibly quaint with a pub that serves mediocre pies. Her reply came 4 days later. Dear Henry. You're spot on about the pub, except the pies are actually quite good. The anchor does a steak and kidney that George always said was better than his mother's, which was a bold claim in our family. I'm sorry about your Patricia. 8 years or 47. Loss is loss, isn't it? It's not a competition, though sometimes I wish it were. At least then we'd know if we were winning or losing. Your daughter sounds lovely, even if she's trying to throw you into the digital dating pool. My son, Michael, keeps suggesting I get out more. By which he means I should join a book club or take up watercolors, or something else that sounds like organized misery. I've tried to explain that I do get out. I go to Tesco's twice a week, and I walk down to the beach every morning. But apparently, that doesn't count as socializing. The seagulls and I have perfectly good conversations, thank you very much. I looked up the West Pier after reading your letter. What a beautiful tragedy. There's something poetic about a pier that survived the war, but couldn't survive time and neglect, don't you think? Though I suppose that's true of most of us. Hartwell-on-Sea is exactly as quaint as you imagined, with the added bonus of terrible mobile phone reception, and a rivalry between two fish and chip shops that has been going on for at least 30 years. I'm on Team Golden Place, but don't tell anyone at the Codfather. Tell me, Henry. What do you do with your days? I'm picturing you in a cardigan, shouting at the television during Prime Minister's questions. Fondly, Dorothy. P.S. I also cry at John Lewis adverts. Last year's absolutely destroyed me. And so it went. Chapter 4. Confessions and Conundrums. Over the next 3 weeks, Dorothy and I fell into an easy rhythm. She'd write about her morning walks and the absolutely bonkers seagull who'd claimed her back garden wall as his personal throne. I'd write about my battles with modern technology. I recently discovered my phone has a torch on it. Where has this been for the past 5 years? And my ongoing feud with next door's cat, who uses my garden as a lavatory. We wrote about our children. Her Michael, who was a solicitor in London and called every Sunday at precisely 6 p.m. My Emma, who taught yoga and made her own kombucha and had recently informed me that dairy was basically poison. I've since increased my cheese intake out of spite. We wrote about our late spouses, too, which surprised me. I hadn't talked about Patricia in years. Not properly. Emma had her memories, and we'd share them at Christmas or on Patricia's birthday. But the little things, the daily texture of life with her, I'd kept to myself. With Dorothy, I could write about Patricia's habit of reading the endings of mystery novels first, or the way she'd hum under her breath while doing crosswords, or how she always left exactly one bite of dessert on her plate for the fairies. Dorothy wrote about George's obsession with bird watching, how he'd drag her out at ungodly hours to spot a rare warbler, and how she'd pretended to be more interested than she was because it made him so happy. She wrote about his terrible jokes and his excellent roast potatoes and the way he'd always kiss her forehead before they went to sleep. It was nice, having someone who understood that you could love someone new while still loving someone you'd lost. That grief and gratitude could live side by side. But we didn't only write about sad things. Dorothy had a wicked sense of humor. She sent me a 2-page rant about a woman in her aqua aerobics class, who wore a swimming cap covered in rubber flowers and spent the entire class complaining about her daughter-in-law. I sent her a detailed account of my attempt to use self-checkout at Sainsbury's, which ended with an assistant having to come over 3 times, and me nearly being escorted from the premises for aggressively scanning a cucumber. In her 7th letter, she wrote, "Do you ever wonder what Margaret would think of all this?" It was a fair question. I thought about it for 2 days before responding. Dear Dorothy, I think Margaret would find it hilarious. She had a good sense of humor about life's absurdities. You'd have liked her. But honestly, I think I was more in love with the idea of Margaret than with Margaret herself. We were young, and everything felt enormous and permanent. Now I know nothing is permanent except regret and back pain. I've been thinking about why I sent that letter in the first place. I think I wanted to feel something again. To remember what it was like to be stupidly, hopelessly infatuated with someone. To remember being young. But here's what's strange, Dorothy. Your letters make me feel that way too. Not young exactly. My knees won't let me forget I'm 73. But alive. Curious. Looking forward to the post arriving, which is something I never thought I'd say. Is that odd? Please tell me if that's odd. Henry. I sent the letter before I could overthink it. Her response came faster than usual. Just 2 days. Dear Henry. It's not odd. Or if it is, then we're both odd together, which seems like good company. I look forward to your letters too. More than I probably should. Michael called last Sunday and asked if I was glowing, which I thought was a bit rich. But maybe he's right. Maybe that's what happens when someone reminds you that you're still capable of surprise. I've been thinking. We've been writing to each other for nearly a month now, and we've never actually established what we're doing. Are we pen pals? Friends? 2 people having a collective crisis? Dorothy. P.S. I think we should keep writing, whatever this is. I agreed completely. Chapter 5. The Grand Revelation. It was Emma who ruined everything. She'd stopped by with a bag of groceries. Translation. Overpriced organic vegetables I'd never asked for and a lecture about my sodium intake. And caught me at the kitchen table, laughing at Dorothy's latest letter. This one included a hand-drawn cartoon of a seagull wearing a crown and the caption, "His Majesty, Duke of the Back Garden Wall." "Who's that from?" Emma asked, peering over my shoulder with the nosiness only a daughter can deploy. "A friend," I said, which was true but apparently insufficient. "What friend?" "You don't have friends." "I have friends." "Name one." I couldn't, which proved her point infuriatingly well. Long story short, Emma discovered the entire correspondence, read through several letters before I could stop her. I really need to work on my reflexes. And spent 15 minutes laughing so hard she had to sit down. "Dad," she finally managed, wiping her eyes. "Do you realize what you've done? Written some letters. You've accidentally started dating someone." "I have not. You're basically in a long-distance relationship with a woman you've never met because you can't read your own handwriting." "It's not dating. We're just corresponding." "You write to each other almost every day." "Pen pals write frequently." "Pen pals don't say things like 'your letters make me feel alive again.'" She had me there. Emma, being Emma, immediately insisted I had to tell Dorothy the truth. That we needed to meet in person. That this was exactly the kind of meet cute that happens in movies. I pointed out that I'm 73 and this is real life, not a movie. She pointed out that I was being a coward. Also fair. I spent the next 3 days agonizing over what to write. How do you tell someone that you've been pouring your heart out to them without ever actually clarifying that you thought she was someone else, even though she told you straight away she wasn't, and now you're worried that if you meet in person, the whole lovely thing will evaporate like morning mist? In the end, I decided to just be honest. It hadn't steered me wrong yet. "Dear Dorothy, I have a confession to make, though I suspect you've already worked this out. I don't think about Margaret anymore. I haven't in weeks, actually. When the post comes, I'm not thinking about a girl from 1969. I'm thinking about you. My daughter says we should meet. She's probably right, though it pains me to admit it. But I'm terrified, Dorothy. What if I'm not the person you've imagined? What if I'm disappointing in 3 dimensions? What if you take one look at me and think, 'Oh dear, I've been writing to that'? On the other hand, I really would like to know if the pies at the Anchor are as good as you claim. Would you be interested in meeting for lunch? I promise I'll try not to be terrifying. Henry. P.S. If you'd rather not, I understand completely. We can keep writing. I'd be happy with that too. I posted the letter and immediately regretted it for 48 hours straight. Her reply arrived on a Tuesday. Dear Henry, I was wondering when you'd ask. I've been looking at train schedules for a week, trying to work up the courage to suggest it myself. Michael thinks I've lost my mind, but he's also offered to drive me halfway if you'll drive from your end. He's a solicitor, so naturally, he's treating this like some sort of prisoner exchange. Here's the thing. I'm 70 years old, and my knees creak when it rains, and I've got 3 gray hairs for every brown one I started with. I'm not the person you've imagined either. But I'd like to meet anyway, if you're willing to risk it. How about lunch at the Anchor, 2 weeks from Saturday? Noon? I'll be the one wearing too much nervousness and probably a sensible cardigan. Yours. And I do mean that. Dorothy. I read the letter 5 times, then called Emma. You need to drive me to somewhere called Heartwell-on-Sea in 2 weeks, I said. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Chapter 6. The Anchor. Emma drove me to Heartwell-on-Sea on a Saturday that was unreasonably sunny for October. She'd offered to wait in the car during lunch, which I'd initially refused until she pointed out that if things went badly, I'd need a getaway driver. I couldn't argue with that logic. I'd changed my shirt 3 times that morning. Eventually, Emma had staged an intervention and forced me into a blue button-down that she claimed brought out my eyes. I wasn't aware my eyes needed bringing out, but I trusted her judgment. The anchor was exactly as I'd imagined. Slightly worn, perfectly charming, with windows overlooking the sea and the smell of chips and salt water mixing in the air. I arrived at 11:55, because being late would be rude, and being too early would make me look desperate. At 11:56, I wondered if this was the worst idea I'd ever had. At 11:58, I considered fleeing to Emma's car. At 11:59, the door opened. I recognized her immediately, though I'd never seen her before. She was shorter than I'd imagined, with grey-white hair cut in a practical bob and bright eyes that were scanning the pub nervously. She wore a purple cardigan that was indeed sensible and carried a handbag that looked like it had survived at least one war. When she saw me, standing awkwardly by a table near the window, wearing my blue shirt and probably looking like a terrified schoolboy, her face broke into the most wonderful smile. "Henry," she said. "Dorothy," I managed. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Then she laughed, and I laughed, and suddenly, it wasn't terrifying anymore. "You look exactly like I thought you would," she said, which I suspected was a kind lie but appreciated nonetheless. "You're lovely," I said, which was entirely true and made her blush. We sat. We ordered. She was right about the pies. And then we just talked. The same way we'd been talking in letters, except faster and with more laughter. She told me about Duke, the seagull, who had apparently staged a coup that morning and stolen her breakfast toast. I told her about the ongoing saga with next door's cat, who I'd recently discovered was named Princess Fancy Paws, which explained a lot about its attitude. We talked about our spouses. Really talked, not just the sanitized versions we sometimes present to the world. We talked about being lonely and being scared and being too old to feel this giddy about anything, let alone lunch with a stranger. Except she wasn't a stranger. Not really. She was Dorothy, who wrote terrible puns in her letters and drew cartoons of seagulls and understood exactly why John Lewis adverts were devastating. At some point, she reached across the table and took my hand. "This is mad," she said. "Completely." I agreed. "I'm glad you can't address an envelope properly. Best mistake I ever made." We stayed at the Anchor until they started setting up for the dinner service. Then we walked along the beach. Slowly, because we're both old and our knees aren't what they used to be. And watched the sun start to sink toward the horizon. "Will you write to me?" she asked. "Haven't we graduated past letters now? I like the letters. There." She paused, searching for the word. "They're us." I understood exactly what she meant. "Then yes," I said. "I'll write to you." "Good. Because I have at least 6 more stories about Duke that I haven't told you yet." Emma picked me up at 6. She took one look at my face and grinned. "Good lunch?" she asked. "The best," I said. Epilogue. Return to sender. 6 months later, during one of Dorothy's visits, she brought up something that had been on her mind. "That letter you meant for Margaret," she said over tea. "You never sent her a proper one, did you? To the right address?" "No," I admitted. "Got a bit distracted." She smiled. "I thought so. Don't you think you should? Finish what you started?" "Why? I got everything I needed from that mistake." "I know," she said, squeezing my hand. "But she might like to know someone remembered her fondly. Even if it's 54 years late. Call it closure. Or just good manners. She had a point. Dorothy usually did. So I sent a letter to Margaret Thornbury at the correct address in Hartwell-upon-Thames. This time with Dorothy checking my handwriting first. Perfect penmanship this time, she said. I'm so proud. It was short, nothing like the original rambling confession. Just a few lines saying I hoped she was well, that I had fond memories of that summer in Brighton, and that life had a funny way of working out. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. But that was fine. Because 3 days later, I received a letter from Dorothy, who was still in Hartwell-on-Sea because she claimed she couldn't possibly move to my town when the Anchor made such excellent pies, but who took the train over every other weekend. Michael still thinks she's lost her mind. Emma thinks we're adorable. They're both probably right. This letter included a pressed flower from her garden, a recipe for George's famous roast potatoes, and a detailed account of Duke's latest territorial dispute with a rival seagull named by Dorothy, Lord Featherbottom. At the bottom, she'd written, "Same time next Saturday? I'll bring the crossword. You bring the terrible jokes. All my love, D. P.S. In your first letter meant for Margaret, you called yourself a devoted fool. I think that's the most honest thing you've ever written. Don't change. And I'm glad you finally wrote to Margaret properly. Some things should be finished, even if they lead somewhere completely different than expected." I read the letter twice, smiled, and sat down to write back. After all, we had a system now. And as my father used to say back when he ran the hardware shop, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Though in this case, I suppose the broken thing, my terrible handwriting and even worse sense of direction, had fixed everything else. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you ask for. Sometimes it gives you something better. Sometimes it gives you Dorothy.